Can you be respected and appreciated as a cop in this day and age? It's hard to imagine, but Deon Joseph, senior lead officer with the LAPD, makes us think twice.
The truth is, I didn't even want to be a police officer at all. Like many young African-American males, I was indoctrinated to hate and fear law enforcement.
After working in Skidrow, advocating for the homeless, and being with the police for 23 years, he shares the reality of being a police officer and how the public may perceive things the wrong way.
My second training officer was a white officer who made 2,300 arrests in a black community over 14 years. And this guy's driving through the neighborhood, and I'm hearing people call his name. Snow, God bless you, Snow. Hey, thanks for helping my cousin, Snow. I'm like, what is going on, right? That's not what my brothers and my activist groups told me. We need leaders who are willing to go into the trenches and tell the truth to the public. And I think the truth will be refreshing to the public because they've heard lies for so long.
So let's dive right in and see why Deon Joseph is a real American game changer. Well, first and foremost, Deon, thank you so much for stopping by and coming here to our studios here at Epoch Times and coming to my show, American Game Changers.
Oh, I'm glad to be here, brother. Thanks for having me.
Well, so first and foremost, I saw a video recently with you in it, and it basically was you in your police uniform walking the streets, and you were really talking to people, especially in Skidrow in that area. But before that, can you tell me a little bit about your background and what led you up to becoming a police officer, and how did you end up working in Skidrow?
Well, the truth is, I didn't even want to be a police officer at all. Like many young African-American males, I was indoctrinated to hate and fear law enforcement. Favorite rap groups were Public Enemy, NWA, then the Rodney King incident hit, and I was protesting that, so I didn't really have a good view of policing. But in the end, long story short, I ended up losing our family business, and basically I was out of work, and then an uncle and a friend said, hey, police department's hiring, why don't you put your name in the hat? I said, okay, if I get hired, I'll do like 2 or 3 years and quit and do something else, right? I got on that job and I ended up working in Venice Beach, and the first day I ended up rescuing a woman who was a victim of domestic violence. It changed my life forever. I said, this is what I want to do, because I was doing this stuff before I was a cop. Now I can do it legally without going to jail and help people without going to jail. But this is great. So Venice Beach, great place. Palm trees, beautiful women on Sunday afternoons if you like that sort of thing, food everywhere. But I could only be there for a year, so because I was on probation. When my probation was up, my then sergeant says, hey, Joseph, your year is up. Where you want to go? 3 choices. So I picked Central, I think, Newton, Southwest, I don't remember. That was 26 years ago. And when I told my training officer, Skidrow was one of my choices, he pulled the car over and he says, what did you do? I was like, Skidrow, sir? Yeah. I was like, you want to go to Skidrow? Well, I don't want to go to shit, but dude, there's nothing but transients there. There's homeless people there. You got to wear a body condom to work there. People have HIV, AIDS, tuberculosis. They have needles in their pocket. You're going to stick your hand in your pocket and you're going to get stuck with a needle and get HIV and bring it to your wife and kids, and there's no place to eat. So me being a man of faith, I went home and got on my knees and said, God, you know I'm a germaphobe. You also know I like to eat. Don't send me to this godforsaken place called Skidrow. And sure enough, he answered my prayer, but not the way I wanted to. I ended up going there, and I couldn't believe that a place like Skidrow actually existed. I heard about Skidrow, but I thought it was Hollywood, you know, like Hollywood movies where there's a homeless guy shaking for change. A lot of the public's perception about policing and homelessness, it comes from Hollywood, which is unfortunate. Like I say, you know how you go to some bad places, there's always a 1.5 mile stretch of territory that warns you first that it's about to get bad. There was no warning. I crossed one street, Spring Street, and it was like I tripped and fell into Dante's Inferno, Mad Max Thunderdome, any natural disaster movie you could think of. I was there, and it was heartbreaking to see people ambling down the streets in hospital gowns with wristbands. Clearly they had been dumped there. But of course, I'm a young cop, I didn't know what to do. And they're in the streets dodging cars, people having sex on the sidewalk, trash piled to your knees, rats the size of cats, people shooting up in broad daylight 2 blocks from a police station. That was crazy. And then I pull up in front of the station and 2 people got into a fight right in front of a patrol car. I'm like, oh God.
And what year is this?
This is 1997.
Okay, wow.
And I was like, God, why did you send me here? I can't stay. I was gonna go in and put my transfer in, and I ran it to the sergeant. Sergeant tells me, hey, you're gonna spend your first 2 months at the desk. And I was like, thank you, Jesus, the desk. That 2 months was the worst 2 months because the desk is right in the heart of Skid Row, and I'm watching victim after victim come into the station, broken arms, lacerated cheeks. One guy walked in with his intestines hanging out, and the common thread with all these victims was nobody wanted a police report because they had to live there. That's where they got their services, and they didn't want to snitch. So once I got out to Skidrow and actually got in for about 3 months, I realized I was home because of my upbringing. And my upbringing, pretty much parents raised 41 foster kids. My mom and dad dealt with the homeless for 10 years on the weekends, trying to help them, trying to get them housed, trying to get them food, and helping homeless families. And my dad trying to help ex-convicts get jobs. That was my life before becoming a police officer. And after about 3 months, I'm realizing I'm dealing with the same people my parents dealt with. I was home because I was seeing so many rape victims, people getting stabbed, and the cases were being rejected just because they were homeless and drug addicted. And these people needed somebody to stand up for them. And I just allowed the spirit of my parents to take over, and I stayed, and I never left with the exception of 1 year to go work with juveniles. And I came right back because I love the people so much. They're really beautiful people in Skid Row that really need somebody to care. And my style of love is like my parents. I'm going to help you, but it's tough love.
So you mentioned, just going back a little bit, you mentioned that before joining the police force, you kind of had a view that was not, I mean, I know you working for kind of changed your view, but how did you flip? And how did you gain more trust for the police?
Well, it was weird. I never had trust for the police, even at the time I got hired. I never had it. That never happened. Truly, I'd been racially profiled twice as a young black man. That exists. No one's denying that. But I also recognized that there was a lot of crime, a lot of young black men dying from black on black violence. And I understood why the police were there. But I didn't like getting pulled over for no reason, just because I'm African American and you had no PC. Those things happen. I never had trust for the police until I got hired. That's where the flip came, when I had to work with the person I was trained or indoctrinated to fear. See, this whole woke thing, it's not new. I was woke before it was woke. I joined an activist group in high school where it started out, let's learn about our culture and our history beyond slavery, because everybody wants to believe that the African American community started at slavery. No, it didn't. We were kings and queens, and there's this great, incredible history with black people historically. So I joined that group because of that. But then it flipped. We ended up getting a woke leader, and everything was about the white man's the devil. America's trying to kill you. And the white man's not going to let you be anything. Here's what you got to do. They're the devil. And I'll never forget. It was when I was sitting at a table and we were talking about police brutality, and they were asking us to, hey, tell a story about how you were brutalized or your family was brutalized by the police. And I'm looking at these guys and I'm like, these are some good kids. They've never been in trouble with the police. I've known these guys. But everybody started telling these stories and I'm like, so I felt pressure, right? I had to come up with my own story. In my head, I'm trying to come up with this topper. And one of my friends next to me was like, they got to him and they said, every day I step outside of my house, the police harass me. And I look at you like, your mom doesn't even let you out the house. How do the police harass you? We can't even get you to come play basketball with us down the street. And I realized at that point that I was being indoctrinated. And a couple weeks later, I left the group. And then I went to college, junior college, and I joined the Black Student Union. And it was more of the same, defeatist, we're victims. And I bought into it. It sounded great. It sounded great. And I worked with officers from all walks of life, white, black, Hispanic. And the one thing I came away with was 90% of what was said about law enforcement officers as a young man, it was completely false. There's a phrase that gets thrown out there that, the system is inherently racist. Everything is racist, everything's racist. I don't believe that. I believe there are racists within the system. There are, just like there are bigots, there are brutes, there are people with apathy in any profession, in any system, you have those individuals, but the reality is brutality, racism, hatred, all these things, love, these are not police traits. These are human traits. As a young officer, my first training officer was a my second training officer was a white officer who made 2,300 arrests in a black community over 14 years. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm gonna die. My people are gonna hate me. I'm gonna get called the N-word or house Negro and all this other stuff. And this guy's driving through the neighborhood and I'm hearing people call his name. Snow, God bless you, Snow. Hey, thanks for helping my cousin, Snow. Hey man, be careful out there. Oh, you got that rook with you? Look, listen to this guy right here. And I'm like, what is going on, right? That's not what my brothers and my activist groups told me. This guy was loved by the community, even though he arrested half the people. So he saw the look on my face and then we pulled over. I go, sir, why do these people love you? I mean, my God, you arrested half of the community. He says, Deon, these folks know we work in a violent area. As long as whether you're arresting them or whether you're counseling them or taking a police report for them, they just want you to treat them like a human being with respect and dignity. And as long as you're working with me, young man, you will do just that. And all I could say was, yes, sir. Because he wasn't teaching me how to be a good cop. I was already a good person. He affirmed the things that I wanted to be. And now it's me out there in Skid Row, 23 years, having people call my name from the rooftops. Hey, Joe, God bless you, Joe. They're my Facebook friends. Who becomes Facebook friends with people in Skid Row? Me. Right. because of individuals like that officer. I've worked with an officer who was from the LGBTQ community, you know, and working with her, I watched her save a 300-pound black woman's life who was threatening to kill herself with a machete. And this officer was 98 pounds soaking wet. And she jumps in there and she's wrestling the knife from the woman. They end up on the ground, her gun falls out and the woman's trying to grab the knife and I'm thinking, oh my God, I have to shoot. So I pull out my gun and I'm about to shoot. And she's like, don't. I got it. And by the grace of God, she was able to wrestle the knife away and reholster. And she saved that woman's life. And I would have had every right to try to save my partner's life. But individuals like that from all walks of life helped mold who I am. And they're more good than bad in law enforcement.
What was some of the scariest things? What was a couple of the scariest things that you saw firsthand that, you know, really opened your eyes to the problems that are happening in Skid Row?
Well, one of the scariest things that I saw was, it dives into mental illness. Mm-hmm. There was a mentally ill man who walked into the front lobby with a gun. Wow. And he was pointing the gun at all the people taking reports at the counter. And one of my partners yells gun, and she runs to the back to go get a shotgun. And I'm just left at the desk by myself. Everybody's ducking, and I see this mentally ill man waving a gun around, and he starts to point it at me, and I pull out my gun, and I'm starting to pull the trigger, and he just drops it. Thankfully, it was a toy gun, but it didn't look like a toy to me. Mm. It looked like a real gun. And these incidents kept happening over, and I've had many close calls on this job, but that opened my eyes to the real systemic failures that police respond to. See, once again, I'm going to say it again, I don't care. Law enforcement officers are not the systemic failures. We're responding to the systemic failures that many of our elected officials will not address for whatever reason. And I don't care if they're left or right. I'm not taking sides because in my opinion, the extremes of both sides have failed us all, not just Californians, but as Americans. But police are responding as human beings to these systemic failures, and they forced us to be the tip of the spear and put us in these positions where, not often, but sometimes we end up having to use deadly force against somebody who needed help a long time ago. They needed help long before they contacted us, and they make us the tip of the spear to respond to these things. And it's not for a lack of training, not for a lack of compassion that these things occur.
Well, you talked about it a little bit here. I mean, this guy was mentally ill, comes in, waving a gun.
Suicide by cop. That's what he wanted.
It seems like that's what he was trying to go for. What would be your solution especially in LA?
Here's what I want to tell the elected officials.
Yeah.
And I'm not knocking you, I'm not hating on you. It's not money, it's method.
Right.
If you can throw all the money at a problem, but if you're using the wrong method, you're just wasting money. Here's what you have to do, especially with a case like that gentleman who came into the lobby, mental illness. The current solution for helping somebody struggling with mental illness when they're in crisis is a 72-hour hold or a 14-day hold, which is 5150 or 5152 of the WIC code in California. And that is a archaic, flawed, useless tool. And here's why. If someone is in crisis, there's only 3 criteria where we're allowed to, quote unquote, help them. And that's whether they're a danger to themselves. Okay, someone like the individual who walked into the lobby, he was a danger to himself because he wanted to kill himself, but he wanted me to do it. Danger to others. There are other extreme cases of people in Skid Row stabbing people who should have been in an institution, should have been institutionalized or at least helped, or gravely disabled. We have many people in Skid Row who cannot take care of themselves, but because they eat and they're able to wear a coat when it's cold, they say, oh, he's okay. So when they meet that criteria, this is what they give us, a 72-hour hold. And it's not even 72 hours anymore because the hospitals are full. So they sprinkle pills on them and say, how are you feeling today? Good, I'm ready to leave now. So they leave, right, and they go right back out into the street to self-medicate on crack cocaine, methamphetamines, and a whole host of other things that exacerbates their condition. So it should never be 72 hours. If you ask me, if we really wanted to solve this problem, we need to bring our civic leaders, civil liberties groups, law enforcement, fire department, Department of Mental Health, bring them all together. And what we need to do is create a program that matches the therapeutic attributes of the medication that they're taking. It takes 6 to 8 weeks for their medication to stabilize them, right? Also, you need that 6 weeks to get them clean so they can hear you, right? And in that 6 weeks, you're developing a rapport. Professionals are developing rapport with these individuals and trying to locate their loved ones to try to help them get conservatorships. On the back end of that, we need our legislators to shorten the process of conservatorships, okay? Because I can tell you many tragic stories of families who would call me and say, Joseph, hey, I know you can help me find my son. They say you're the man. I said, sure, I know where your son is. And they'll fly out, right? And they'll come to find their son because their son is in the hospital. But then by the time they get to the hospital, the son has been released 2 hours before they got there. And now they have to start the whole process of trying to find their son, which is now a needle in the haystack. Now that we have encampments everywhere, there's too many places for them to hide and we can't find their loved ones. So that is one solution. Also, if you're going to create what's called a recovery zone or a place where there's drug programs, shelters, things to try to help homeless people get off their feet, you have to take that seriously, and you really have to create serious penalties for individuals who bring drugs into those facilities. You know, you can no longer slap these guys on the wrist. In 2010 and 11, I was a catalyst for an unprecedented injunction that barred 75 known drug dealers from the Skidrow area, 75 of them. And these guys were not homeless. We confirmed that. They had places to live. They were convicted of drug sales 3 times within 2 years, if I remember correctly. And it worked. It actually kept those guys away, but there was a judge who decided, oh, you know what? It's unconstitutional to keep drug dealers from drug programs. Of course they need the drug programs because there's drug addicts in there. And it's just mind-blowing what we're up against when we're trying to solve things from a common sense, realistic approach. And unfortunately, we have a lot of people who are too idealistic, or they've bought into the whole systemic racism argument, lock and step. And they're really stymieing those efforts. The other thing is you got to decentralize services. You know, Skid Row, we need all 108 programs there. There are 108 programs to help people with a myriad of issues. But I don't want to see another one built in Skid Row. Every time I hear of a plan, we're going to do it in Skid Row, I just cringe, because basically you're setting people up for failure. Because how do people get clean when the drug dealer is not only outside of their program, but many times they get in by paying off corrupt security guards or staff members to go in and flood the hotels with drugs. And these are low-income supportive hotels that are designed to help people have case management and wraparound services, but they're almost ineffective because now the drug dealers are inside the building. So you're setting people up for failure when you centralize services. A lot of people's argument is, we don't want, not in my backyard, we don't want your drug addicts. Well, they're not really our drug addicts. You had them first, you just sent them to us, you know, when you didn't want to deal with them, right? But yeah, specialized services for the elderly, specialized services for families, single mothers with children, whole families. Those things aren't going to turn the drug dance. And that's been proven with a project called the Hope Gardens Project that was put on by the Union Rescue Mission by a wonderful human being named Andy Bales. The guy's an angel walking on earth. And you should have seen the fight it took to get that location up and running in Sylmar. I mean, people brought their tiki torches.
I saw a little bit of that,
yeah. It was crazy because they said, oh, they were just going to burn the hills down. There's going to be drugs everywhere. Not one incident since that place. That thing's been open for about 10 years. So if we specialize services and we house people who are ready, build shelters for people who are actually ready for change, take some of the pressure off of places like Skid Row so people can have a fighting chance, not just in Skid Row, but in places where the temptation is not as great to fail. If I had a magic wand, if I was the governor of the state of California, this is what I would do.
Could a governor come in there and make and implement the changes that you just said?
Well,
can he get through all the bureaucracy, all the red tape that is that possible? Is it?
I think it is.
Yeah.
I think it is. I believe what a governor does, for the most part, is sets a tone. They can set tones. If you're the head of a state, you can set a tone and direction and start to influence. You have a platform to really influence voters in the right way and get them on the right side. And we don't have that right now. We have leaders all up and down the state of California who have bought into the wrong thing. But we need to use our laws to effectively stop those who are repeatedly committing violent acts, repeatedly engaged in property crimes, because safety is the cornerstone of anything we want to do, whether it's drug programs for people trying to rehabilitate, social services for kids, you know, kids programs for kids and kids in parks, whatever you want to create to try to implement change, safety has to be the cornerstone, and you need a leader to understand that. You need the police as part of that solution, not to be away from the solution, and to look at things from a realistic, not idealistic place. Because I believe that if you really get people together and get them in a room, and I've done this, I've taken 3,500 college students, and these are college students, many of them from super left-wing colleges, and they heard so much bad stuff about me from advocacy groups. So let's go down and let's talk to this Joseph, this racist, bigoted cop who wants to incarcerate everybody, right? All it took was 2 hours for me to give them a non-politicized view of what was happening from a boots-on-the-ground view. 2 hours, I erased 2 semesters of indoctrination. And then, to top it off, we go for a walk in Skidrow, and where they're seeing the homeless people approach me and saying, thank you. Hey, listen to whatever this officer's telling. Right. We need leaders who are willing to go into the trenches and tell the truth to the public. And I think the truth would be refreshing to the public because they've heard lies for so long. The truth is going to do one or two things. It's going to offend them at first. But then once it sets in and it matches their common sense, they're going to say, this guy's absolutely right.
So do you believe the people that are currently in position are not going to put us in, is not going to be able to turn this thing around anytime soon?
No, there's no way, because it's what they're suffering for, what I call paralysis by analysis, or they're worried about optics. They're too worried about what will people think of me if I make this move, and that's not leadership. True leadership is seeing an issue, telling the public the truth about the issue, and then responding in truth to the issue. That's leadership. And we don't have that in this state. And I'm not knocking all politicians. I don't want to get in trouble with it. But they know who they are, and the public knows who they are. Just look at the crime data. It's on the upward trajectory. It's going in a direction that's so dangerous and concerning. These numbers remind me of what we saw in the early 2000s. And I worked in a place called Newton Division, where there was a body dropping every night. People getting dumped on the freeway, people shooting up apartment complexes with kids playing in the front yard. And the officers did such a good job over 13 years to bring crime down. And 2014, well, I would say it started in 2011. 2011 began the end of that with AB 109, and then Prop 47 in 2014. And then I couldn't believe that with Prop 47 failing at its inception, I couldn't believe that the voters voted unanimously for its evil step cousin, Prop 57. And I was one of those guys. I couldn't say it in uniform, right? Because in uniform you can't be political. But man, I was on social media. For the love of God, don't do this, people.
So tell me a little bit about Prop 57. I don't know the ins and outs necessarily about Prop 57.
Well, let's talk about Prop 47 first.
Okay.
Let's go back to AB 109. AB 109 was Jerry Brown's baby. Governor Jerry Brown, and basically what he did was, of course, this movement was to try to minimize the population of the prison systems. And what he did was he took it was a shell game. So basically he took the state prisoners and put them on the backs of the counties across the state. But you got to understand, in many places, the county agencies, the probation departments, were already overwhelmed with cases that they already had. So now you have these new former parolees who are now AB 109 parolees on the backs of county probation. So they were so overwhelmed that they gave these guys flimsy ankle bracelets, and they just cut them off, and the arrest had to check in at a kiosk. They weren't even assigned to anybody. They had to go to a kiosk and slide a card and say, I've checked in. When a kiosk doesn't know that you just stabbed a woman, a kiosk doesn't know that you have 3 ounces of cocaine in your pocket that you're going to go sell. So that's what happened with AB 109. Then came Prop 47, where they turned certain serious crimes and turned them into non-serious crimes, and said that they were going to provide programs instead of jail for a lot of these individuals who were being reverted to not considered non-serious criminals, right? And that was a lever to release a lot of individuals, but it also made it difficult for us to send a lot of routine offenders back. And then came Prop 57, which I felt was a nail on the coffin for crime control, where basically they said they took a lot of things that we all know universally are nonviolent crimes, are violent crimes, and turn them into nonviolent crimes. Let me ask you, think of your favorite woman in your life, your mother, your cousin, your sister. If she went to a bar and someone slipped some GHB in her drink and took her home and savagely raped her while she was unconscious, would you believe that's a violent crime?
100%.
Under Prop 57, it's not a violent crime. It's still a felony, but it's non-violent. If someone walked in this room with you and me and my beautiful wife sitting over there with an AK-47 and sprayed the entire room, but nobody got killed, you think that's a violent crime?
100%.
Under Prop 57, that's not a violent crime.
Wow.
So it created these levers to reduce the prison population. But here's the problem is they offered no real services to these individuals. And we knew it. We knew they weren't going to do it. They were impotent at best if they had them, and nobody was getting help. So what it ended up doing over time was emboldening these criminals. And then what happens with Minneapolis with the murder of George Floyd, that was the icing on the cake for a lot of anti-police advocates. This was the one we needed to really push forward with this, what do they like to call it, reimagining law enforcement. And they reimagined it all right. They've handcuffed us, they've made us the fall guy, and once again, we're not the systemic failure because you tied our hands, right? Hey, we're basically limited in what we could do, but crime's going up. People of color are still suffering, so that proved right there that we weren't the problem. We need crime control. And I'm not saying we don't need services. You can have crime control and services working synergetically. I saw it happen from 2005 to 2011 during an initiative where we actually focused on Skidrow and used enforcement, enhancements, and outreach working simultaneously to help make that place better. And here's the result of that: 40% crime reduction across the board. Death was reduced by 33%. We created an environment where people could benefit from drug programs. But when you take away the mandatory programs, people are going to continue to choose to continue to destroy themselves and also others to get what they need. Because understand, the number one question I get asked by a lot of college students is, well, if these people are homeless, how do they get money to get their stuff? They commit crime. When someone breaks in your car and takes your $1,500 laptop, don't do that, folks. Don't leave your stuff in your car. You know, when somebody busts your head to the white meat to get your wallet, 9 times out of 10, it's addiction driving it. So you can't separate addiction from violent crime. It all goes together. And if it's not dealt with, you're going to have chaos.
And I think you kind of mentioned a point. I was listening to this podcast not that long ago, and they talked about how they handled homelessness and crime in like places like Europe and like Amsterdam.
Yeah.
But in like Amsterdam, they were very much like the carrot and the stick method.
Yeah.
They'll give you some carrots. They will have the things that but they let you know you're not going to get something.
Yeah.
You're not going to get the service unless you're not stealing. You're not using it. Like,
we did that.
Yeah.
We did that from 2005 to 2010.
And that's what it sounded like, yeah.
Through a program called SOS, Streets or Services, where we understand that the majority of people were committing crimes to satisfy addictions or because of mental health. So if you committed a crime, we arrested you.
Right.
We put you in a program for 21 days for whatever drove you to commit the crime. And if you completed that program, we dropped the charges. But unfortunately, the media didn't talk about that.
Right.
All they talked
100%.
about was the police were rousting the homeless, but they didn't know that in 2009, 2,225 individuals were signed up for our program for an alternative to jail. And it worked. We were able to maintain order, but at the same time, have accountability, because I always say the homeless, no one can be above the law, not even the homeless. What happens when the rich are above the law? You have Enron, you have scandal, you have
Right.
people losing their life
100%.
savings, the elderly having to live off of cat and dog food, right? Because of the filthy rich got to do what they wanted to do. And it's the same thing with people on the other end of the spectrum who are made to be above the law. You have Skidrow and it metastasizing. As we're seeing across the state, it's metastasizing. There has to be order, there has to be accountability, but you can use laws to help people. And we were doing that, and they took that away, and it's not working. What they're doing right, the hands-off approach, we're trusting you to get better on your own. You know, it's not working. It's failing.
So my final question to you is, so my show is American Game Changers. I love to give hope, especially to young people out there, to everyone in general. But what is your message for hope? If you have a message of hope, it's something that people can believe in and, you know, just go on just here in the state.
This is my message for hope. I have a couple, but in my mind, I have a mantra that I live by every day. When I go out there and police. Yes, I have a badge. Yes, I have a gun. Yes, I have a vest. I have a lot of tools that are used for violence. Not proactive violence, but in the case I have to defend a citizen or myself. Yeah. But just remember to operate from a place of common sense. Your heart has to be, is always the catalyst for any noble thing you want to do. My heart always drove me to be there for the people of Skid Row in the way that I have for 23 years. But I always use my head to get it done. And the problem we're seeing today is we're too busy being led by our hearts and our emotions, and we're making things worse. Because emotions eradicate facts. Emotions eradicate common sense. And we have to get back to that. Yeah, you can love on people, but you got to use your head to help them. And that's something I would share with people. And I've been pretty successful at it for the past 16 years as a senior lead officer. And I just wanted to share that with people.
Absolutely. Deon, your story has been super inspiring. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate it. Where can people find you?
Oh, you can find me at my website, www.deonjoseph.org, or you can find me on Twitter at OFCR Deon Joseph, or my Facebook fan page, Officer Deon Joseph, and you can hear my thoughts. And Medium. I'm on Medium, where you can see my thoughts. Don't judge me on this one video interview, because I know there's somebody out there like, I don't like what he said, and you're just taking that and running. I am a very deep guy. Yeah. There's more to me than what you hear in 30 minutes. But go to medium.com. You'll hear my perspective on life, and I'm sure you'll agree once you take your emotions out of it.
100%. Thank you so much, Deon.
All right. Take care, brother.